Welcome back, Breakaway Wealth. I'm your host, Jim Oliver, and with me today is Boomer Philbrick. And welcome, Boomer.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Audience, I met Boomer at Logan Rankin's real estate workshop in May, and his presentation about how to save taxes if you're a real estate investor and was just awesome. And I learned a lot. And I wanted to share that with the audience. So, Boomer, before we dive into that, why don't you just give everybody a quick introduction about yourself and where you're from, how you got into what you're doing.
Absolutely. So, no, I've been in cost segregation now for about 6 years. I went to college at Arizona State. After that, I kind of got into working in football. I worked in the NFL and college football for 11 years. Got my master's at the University of Miami during that time as well. And basically, for lack of a better word, I worked for one too many assholes in football. And I said, you know what, there's more to life than spending 100 nights a year in the office, not making very good money, and not basically having freedom to do what you want. So I got out of football about 6 years ago. I haven't missed a day in my life. Helped a lot of kids along the way, met a lot of great people, but being able to help people in a different aspect of their life, obviously help them save money on taxes, as well as giving them financial freedom and more cash flow, is something that I have connected with and I've really enjoyed the last 6 years.
That's awesome. You serving people and showing people how to keep more of their money. There's nothing really more important than that. As we teach people at Create Tailwind how to do infinite banking and how to take control of the banking function in your life. I mean, I wouldn't see myself doing anything else. And I could tell by the passion that you just explained what you do, and at the workshop, the passion that you delivered the information. I can tell you feel the same way about what you do.
Absolutely.
And so, okay. So Boomer, let's start with somebody out there that doesn't even know what cost segregation means, why we would do it, or anything else. Maybe they haven't even, started their first real estate deal. I love Logan's story because 5 years ago, and I may butcher this a little bit, but 5 years ago, he had less than $1 million of real estate. And now 5 years later, I think he's approaching $250 million of real estate. And, he's a phenomenal person, obviously, and he's going to excel in anything he does, but it shows you a roadmap. So for the person out there that maybe they just don't know anything about it, let's start there. What is cost segregation?
So unfortunately, cost segregation, the word itself doesn't really explain what it does. Cost segregation is simply accelerated depreciation. So whenever you purchase a property, every single component inside your property is going to be depreciated on one single line item over 27 and a half years if it's a multifamily property, or over 39 years if it's a commercial property or an Airbnb. So what an engineered cost segregation study does is it'll break your property down into probably 40 or 50 different components and place those components into their shorter and correct class lives. So your goal as an investor is to shorten down the life of as many assets as possible. So we're simply going to place these assets into 3 different buckets: into a 5-year bucket, a 15-year bucket, and then a 27 and a half or 39-year bucket. Now, back in 2017, whenever Trump released the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, he said any asset that has a class life of less than 20 years, you're able to take 100% bonus depreciation on and reap that all in year 1. So it doesn't matter what we put in the 5-year bucket or the 15-year bucket. Those are both less than 20 years. So you're going to be able to fully depreciate those assets immediately in year 1. So now you're probably going, what kind of assets go into those different buckets? In the 5-year bucket is going to be things like your flooring, your molding, your kitchen cabinets and countertops, your bathrooms, your window coverings, your light fixtures. If you have a security system, all things like that are going to go in the 5-year bucket. In the 15-year bucket, it's going to be things like your parking lot, your landscaping, and any kind of exterior signs, fences, or walls are all going to go in the 15-year bucket. Everything else structural in terms of your roof, your foundation, your HVAC, all things like that are going to stay in your 27.5 or 39-year bucket. Now, kind of a rule of thumb and a good way to think about it is anything that makes the building more comfortable or more specialized is what you're going to be able to accelerate. So if you look at a commercial property and you have any kind of specialty electrical, any kind of specialty plumbing, anything like that, that is all more than what the building needs to be operable or livable. And that's what you're going to be able to accelerate. So the 100% bonus depreciation is great because it doesn't matter what we put in those buckets. You're going to be able to fully depreciate those assets immediately in year one. So on a typical multifamily property, you're probably looking at about 20 to 25% that you'll be able to accelerate. In a commercial property, depending on if it's like a completely automatic car wash, if it's a doctor's office or a dentist's office where they have specialty wiring going to their machines and things like that, that's all going to be in the higher depreciation bucket. And one question that I get a lot is, you know what, Boomer, that sounds great that I can depreciate an extra 25% this year, but what about the following years? I don't want you to take all my depreciation now. We're not taking everything right now. We're only taking what the IRS allows. So let's use round numbers here. If you have $1 million property and we're going to be able to accelerate 25% of that, you're going to have an extra $250,000 of depreciation expense in the current year. The remaining 75% that we didn't touch, you're still going to depreciate that over the life of the property over 27.5 or 39 years. So you're still going to have a lot of depreciation in the following years. We're just giving you a whole lot more now to let you, the smart business person, you, the smart investor, have more money in your pocket now to either buy another property, fix up a property, pay down debt, whatever you want to do. It gives you more cash flow right now.
Oh, that sounds good. Saving tax. I mean, so when I look at real estate, I look at infinite banking, buying cash flowing assets with infinite banking, like real estate. I look at the different rate returns that we get, right? I mean, the property is going to appreciate. We're going to have rate of return of cash flow because it's going to provide cash flow. But when we can take depreciation, that's a rate of return. If we're not paying money, then we're saving money. If we're saving money, we're making money. So depreciation is a return on that real estate that I think so many people kind of ignore sometimes.
Very much so. And the thing is that cost segregation or accelerated depreciation, you're not getting any more depreciation. You're getting the same amount of depreciation. It is just being front loaded. So that's why the accelerated depreciation method is the IRS's preferred method. The only thing is you have to have an engineering firm do the cost seg study for you. So unless you use one of the big four accounting firms, chances are they don't have engineers in-house to do the studies. So it has to be outsourced to an engineering firm like ourselves that are able to do all of the calculations for you to be able to place these assets into their correct and shorter class lives. And the thing is that after we break these assets up into their different class lives, they're each going to have their own individual allocation for what they are. Whereas whenever you buy a property initially, every single one of those building components is going to be intertwined in the building itself and depreciated over the longest period of time. So we're simply, if you want to call it reverse engineering, we're breaking down your building into all the different components and then reallocating them into their shorter and proper class lives. Because, for example, we all know carpeting doesn't last 39 years. So that's why carpeting is a 5-year asset. And it probably doesn't even last 5 years, but it's going to be able to allow you to depreciate your property over a faster schedule, which is going to increase your annual depreciation, which will ultimately reduce your income, reduce your tax liability, and gives you more money right now.
That's awesome. It's funny because I remember a couple of years ago, for some reason, I was watching the Today Show. I think I was just flipping it around and they came on and they were, of course, bashing Trump. And I don't care if you love him or hate him, but it's funny. They said Donald Trump lost over $1 billion between the year and this year. It was like a 10-year period. And I said, oh no, they're going to tell everybody how to use depreciation in real estate. And that's going to get it on the IRS's radar or something. And I don't want them to tell everybody that you can buy real estate and depreciate it while it's appreciating in value. I don't want them to tell people that, right? And they didn't. They just wanted to bash Trump. They wanted to keep it as simple as possible. He's not a great businessman. He lost $1 billion. What kind of businessman is that? And when knowledge is power, right? And we have to understand how the system works. So when I'm working with you, I buy a property. Like, walk me through again the basics. I buy a property. I call Boomer. I go on your website. I request a meeting, or however that I engage you. Tell me what happens then.
Yeah. So basically what happens is that we always want to give you an analysis of what your savings is going to look like, because a lot of times people, like I said, aren't familiar with it, or they are just hearing about it. And it's always a lot easier to understand when you have something tangibly in front of you that directly applies to you. So whenever you buy a property, I'm basically going to ask you 4 different questions. Number 1, when did you buy the property? What did you pay for it? Are you doing renovations and improvements to this property? And what's the address? So with that, I can give that to our engineers, and they'll put together a no-cost analysis for you. And it's basically going to show you a conservative view of what your savings is going to look like in the current year. So that's kind of how the process starts initially. Then you and I will have a quick phone call to review the analysis. It'll paint the picture a lot more clear after you have something tangibly in front of you that directly applies to you, and the numbers are all explained to you. So after that happens, then you might talk to a partner, want me to answer any more questions. And then whenever the actual cost seg study is done, we physically have to be on site to take pictures to back up all of our calculations. So we've done over 20,000 of these studies in all 50 states. We've never had a single line item overturned. So these things are completely bulletproof to you. And we make this as easy on your CPA as possible. They're simply going to take our accelerated number, add it to their straight line number in their software, and they're good to go. So this is a very easy process for you and your CPA. After we take the pictures, I'll simply get your settlement statement and an appraisal if you had one done. We don't care about any numbers that are in the appraisal. There's just normally blueprints and drawings, which are helpful to the engineers in terms of dimensions of the building and rooms and things like that. But after that, the process is pretty easy going forward. If you happen to do any renovations to the property, we will update our report whenever those renovations are done. But we like to get out there as soon as possible after you buy a property, because it doesn't matter if you bought a property that was built in 1990. As soon as there's a new transaction and you're a new owner, the depreciation starts over. So even though the building was built in 1990, the IRS looks at all your building components as being brand new. So whenever you go to replace a component, what you're throwing in the dumpster has a value. However, like I mentioned previously, until a cost seg study is done, every single building component is going to be intertwined with the building. So if you throw something in the dumpster, you've lost that value. After we've placed a dollar value on that individual asset and placed it in its correct class life, whenever you throw something in the dumpster, you're able to realize that value as well as the new component that you're putting in. So that's kind of a big part of how we like to get in there as soon as possible, so that you're able to realize the disposition of what you're throwing away in the dumpster as well. So that's pretty much how it goes. But normally we'll have these studies done for you in probably 2 to 3 weeks after the engineers have begun their calculations. But like I said, it's an easy process. And one thing to know of is that cost seg works on both new and existing properties. So even if you bought a property in a previous year and you didn't know about cost segregation, or it didn't apply to you at the time, you're still able to do it now. So we would simply pull forward all the money that you left on the table the past few years and get you caught up into present day. And so now you're able to realize all the money that was left on the table, which will increase your cash flow immediately.
That's awesome. Boomer, I really I like people that really know their subject. And again, this is the, second or third time that I've talked to you about this. And I've talked to other people about cost segregation, and nothing against them, but I haven't heard anybody talk about cost segregation with as much confidence and clarity as you do. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to Boomer and find out, hey, is this, how can I benefit from this? Because again, when we look at all the benefits of buying real estate, depreciation is one of them. If we're going to have depreciation, we should have accelerated depreciation for the very reasons that you've said. And as you're buying more properties, other than going to the bank for a loan, I love that when I look at my tax return and I've taken 7 figures off for depreciation, or, I mean, I would, look, I know people that are making millions and millions of dollars a year in real estate, and they're paying tax on maybe they're not paying tax, right? All the way down to not paying tax. So if you think about it, that's where we want to be, right? We want a lot of cash flow, and we don't want any income, or we want to be able to get our income down to zero, because then that's ideal. And the lower you can get it with these kinds of techniques. So Boomer, how would somebody get a hold of you?
Yeah, so basically, you can give me a call or a text on my cell phone. My number is 812-639-0656. Or you can send me an email. My email is just my first and last name, Boomer, Boomer, last name Philbrick, PHILBRICK @gmail.com. So that's pretty much this whole way. And like you said, simply reach out and find out if cost segregation applies to you. So a lot of common misconceptions people have is, oh, you know what? My property is too small. Well, if you and I would have talked 5 or 7 years ago, chances are the property would have to be $1 million or more for cost seg to make sense. But one thing people don't realize is that the tax laws are designed for everybody. So the same laws that apply to Apple, Google, and Delta Airlines apply to you and me as well. So people simply just don't realize that. So right now, in terms of with the advancements in technology and a lot of sweat equity, if you have a property that's probably $150,000 or more, chances are cost seg is going to make sense from an ROI perspective. So definitely, let's look at your individual situation. Let's figure out what your income level is, what your tax liability is. But basically, there are 2 reasons why you wouldn't do a cost seg study. Number one, if you don't make any money, because this is used to reduce income. So if you're not paying any taxes, cost segregation is probably not going to apply to you right now. And number 2, if you are flipping properties. So if you're buying and selling properties in the same year, chances are cost seg is not going to make sense for you, because the amount of recapture that you would do a cost seg study. But like I said, it works on both new and existing properties. So even if you purchased something last year or a couple years ago, we can still pull forward all the money and get you caught up onto that. But like I said, simply reach out to me in any of the methods we talked about, and happy to talk about your situation, provide you an analysis, and figure out, does this make sense for me from an ROI perspective? And if not, then I can learn about it. So as my portfolio grows, then it will make sense to me going forward. So like you said, Donald Trump's the face of cost segregation. He was, like you said, people thought he was a bad business person, but he was just smarter than everybody else in terms of taking advantage of the tax laws that are designed for everybody. So all these big corporations were all doing it, and he was doing it as well. They just wanted to exploit him. So therefore, he was the face of it. But yeah, whenever he did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it made 100% bonus depreciation available to everybody. And that's why real estate is the best vehicle you can have right now.
I couldn't agree more. And there's there's a tsunami coming with affordable housing and everything else. And yeah, I mean, we have to be in real estate, and people want to, if you want to go negative and think 2008, 2009, go there. But I'm just telling you, this is a totally different situation. and housing, and the way that we're going to get out of the recession that's coming is building and housing. It's not going to cause it. So, all right, Boomer. So if God came down from heaven and allowed you to only retain the knowledge from one book you've read in your life, what would that book be?
So, like I mentioned before, I worked in football for 11 years. I worked under Nick Saban at the Dolphins, and he wrote a book called "How Good Do You Want to Be?" It basically, I mean, he's become the pinnacle of sports and coaching and football. And I think that the book shares a lot of insight into what takes you from being good to great to elite. So that's probably the book that I'd recommend, that I've received a lot of value from, that is kind of outside the a normal realm of someone might be looking for. But even though it was written a few years ago, I definitely think you could pick up some good knowledge and insight into what allows somebody to be great at whatever they do.
You know, no, I love that, and I love the Saban, just all the success that he's had. And I mean, success, I mean, winners win, right? And so that's great. I've not read that book, but I'll be driving about 30 hours in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be on my list for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, and you even look at someone like him who is extremely successful in what he does. And back even when he was coaching at LSU, so probably in the early 2000s, he had enough insight and enough intelligence to he bought up all the student housing around LSU's campus.
that's
So
awesome.
even though he makes a ton of money through football, through Alabama, through appearances and things like that, he's getting all this passive income coming in from just a smart investment many years ago, that is just exponentially increasing his wealth.
I love that. I love to hear those stories like that because guys are smart. It's like Jim Harbaugh uses infinite banking and an insurance contract to the University of Michigan pays him on a deferred executive bonus plan. And so I love to see that these guys have the access to the best advice, and they're doing things outside of Wall Street. They're not just sticking all that money on Wall Street. I guarantee you that. So Boomer,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for joining us. I could probably sit here and talk about saving taxes all day long, but really appreciate it. We'll have to have you back on and maybe have you do something on the community along the lines of cost segregation and tax savings. We maybe put together a course or something like that. So audience, thank you very much for listening.